Zombie fires. Let's talk about zombie fires today. Zombie fires are something that you absolutely should have heard about. And I think that it is very strange that this isn't consistent national news. If you listen to the Daily News podcast, it's Sandy and Nora, you will have heard last week a story from the BBC by Nadine Youssef, who was talking about the phenomenon of zombie fires. So, what's a zombie fire? That's when the embers from the previous forest fire season, the wildfire season, don't actually extinguish and they live under the snow, continuing to burn. They do this even though temperatures might hit minus 20, minus 30, or even higher, lower, whatever, you know what I mean. And these zombie fires are, a problem probably pretty obviously because they will set in motion the next year's wildfire season. So there are 91 zombie fires burning across Canada. And to give you an idea, in Alberta alone, there are 57 zombie fires burning. That is nearly 10 times more than the 5-year average. This is setting us up for a devastating wildfire season that will likely start earlier and will start the second that the snow starts to recede in all parts of Canada. I mentioned that this is from the BBC, that this news is not from a Canadian outlet. And when I was looking into how many times Canadian outlets have reported about zombie fires, it's actually really, well, not surprising. It's very little. And between international coverage and local coverage or Canadian coverage on the phenomenon, it's almost split evenly. So this is a story from BBC. The Daily Fail picked it up as well for the UK to be like, oh my God, Canada's got fires in the middle of winter. What the fuck? This is bad news. NPR did a long piece on it as well. And then I found, a piece here and there, one from the Globe and Mail earlier in January, one from the National Post that is much more of a Q&A. What are these things? And one or two previously in the fall where they're saying, oh my God, the wildfire season was so bad. Zombie fires are something that we need to look out for, like pay attention to this. Where's the rage and the fear and the alarm and the, oh my God, what are we doing to the planet in this story? Like already we know that this winter has been record breaking for a whole bunch of things, not the least of which is to mention the record low amount of ice that has gathered on the Great Lakes, which is, devastating. Certainly on the St. Lawrence, which is just over there, we're seeing far much ice coverage than ever before, really, at this time of year. And, it's minus 20 out today, but I think I can count on one hand how many days have been that cold, whereas normally most of January and February are supposed to be that cold in Quebec. And so here we have embers that are burning underground, ready to awaken with spring to make sure that our next spring, summer, and fall are just as devastating as they were last year, if not even worse. This is a disaster. It is an emergency, and it puts the focus exactly on how little we're doing to adapt, to fight or resist or change course on climate. If the second the snow recedes and spring comes, and spring is supposed to be a wet season, if we start seeing wildfires breaking out in early March, in late March, and early April before the wildfire season is supposed to start, I mean, this is devastating for communities that have to live with smoke. And who are the communities that have to live with smoke? I mean, first of all, obviously, there's a disproportionate number of communities living with huge amounts of dangerous particulate in the air because of forest fires that are indigenous. But we also know that the wind doesn't care about where it sends forest fire smoke to. And we'll remember those apocalyptic images from New York City last year. All of us living in big cities probably had, some sort of inconvenience in our lives last summer as a result of wildfires. Now, the lack of attention from this from the Canadian media is really, I think, the most important part of today's video. Where are Canadian journalists on this? Like, is it the case that there's just not much to say? And what really is there to report? Sure, there's fires burning. Like, on the balance of things, big deal. The story will be once the wildfires actually ignite. But there is an important role that ongoing coverage of ongoing disasters plays in making us aware of how high the stakes are. You know, we are still in periods with record-breaking profits from the largest oil and gas producers in this country. Oil and gas producers have not really been forced to do all that much to reduce at all, to reduce the amount of oil and gas they're producing, to reduce the amount of their environmental destruction and damage. And instead, what we get are these really ridiculous debates that are all filtered through the lens of federal politics. So the most amount of discussion there has been in the Canadian media has been related to carbon pricing and whether or not the government is going to call it a tax or a fee, whether or not Pierre Poilievre is really going to axe the tax or fax the flax or do some shit, like whatever. And as this happens, there's burning, there's embers under the ground that are burning. This is a disaster. And we need journalists to be on top of this so that it isn't, once again, surprise in March when we start to see wildfires again. Where did this come from? Oh, sure, there'll be a little line about zombie fires, but it will always be reported to us as if there's no history. We didn't know. This is shocking. What's going on? What a shock. What a surprise. Blah, blah, blah. We're goldfish land. No narrative through on what we're living. So last year, if we're going to learn anything about the coverage from last year, the far right was very, very good at turning the forest fire story into, well, these are man-made forest fires. I mean, some of it was even as ridiculous as Trudeau himself is setting these forest fires, which is like, you have to be delusional to think that, folks. If you do think that, you got to seek help because Trudeau is not setting forest fires. But the reality is that we do know that some of the sort of forest fires were set. Forest fires have always been set by humans. There's a reason why they've had to trot out Smokey the Bear to say only you can prevent forest fires because they are often set by humans. There's a reason why when you go into different forests all over Canada, there's a big dial with a wooden arrow and the arrow says you can have a fire or you can't have a fire. It is super, super normal for humans to set fires that get out of control because humans, especially those of us who are white, don't respect fire like at all. So if that is part of the world as it is, that humans will set forest fires, and on top of that, there's also other things that will set forest fires, like lightning strikes or other things that are not man-made. The conditions by which climate change have transformed our forests means that whether it's accidental, intentional, criminal arson, lightning strikes, it actually doesn't matter because the impact is the wildfire all the same. So we have to reject those narratives about whether or not this is man-made or not, because we know that the forests have been primed to no longer resist fire and to use fire the way that they have always used fire for as long as the forests have existed. Especially if we know that these forest fires are not being fully extinguished because of a combination of warmer winters and more intense fires. So prepping the conversation now for what will be another record-setting forest fire year is hyper critical. And it is not good enough that the most recent reporting is coming from the BBC. We have a BC. It's called the CBC. And, you know, for there not to be like constant attention and focus on the causes of climate change, the villains in the climate change story, why this is happening, then of course the far right is going to be consistently sticking itself into this conversation and being like, oh, actually it's all fake. Justin Trudeau himself is setting these forest fires. You know, if we look at what's going on in Chile, massive forest fires there as well, also seemingly intentionally set. Lots of people have lost their lives, to say nothing about losing homes and all of that kind of stuff. That is going to happen in Canada too. And the only reason why we don't take it that seriously is because the entire city of Toronto, the entire city of Calgary, the entire city of Vancouver is not what is going to be burned down first. It will be Indigenous communities and rural communities and communities also that rely on oil and gas industries. We've created these feedback loops that are really, really dangerous. And every single time the forest burns, we are releasing carbon into the atmosphere and we are accelerating this downward spiral of climate change. So, if you're a journalist, please focus on this. Please talk about zombie fires. Please put these questions to the Prime Minister. What are you doing to even pretend like you care about this? Put this to Pierre Poilievre. Do you know what a zombie fire is? Do you think this is concerning? You will be the next Prime Minister at some point. What is your plan? Or is it just to say nothing all the time? You notice I'm not even talking about the NDP. Sorry, NDP. I don't know. I don't know if it's necessary at this point. You're propping up the Liberals. Let's focus on the Liberals. Maybe once you get out of that agreement, we can talk about what your plan is to dealing with this stuff. But it's a disaster and it's coming for us. It's, the train is coming for us. Are we going to get off of the track, or are we just going to be like, oh, a shooting star, that's so beautiful, and then, whoop, it's going to kill us? Because there are lives at stake. There are lives at stake. There are people's homes at stake. There are communities, livelihoods, breathing, respiratory illnesses, all of this stuff, our healthcare system, which is already on the brink of collapse. All of this is connected. And if we ignore it, the only people that will then formulate the narrative of what is happening is the far right. And then you'll see the mainstream media trying to play catch up to them. And that's not where we want to be. Don't forget, like and subscribe and do all the thing. Comment. The last video had a lot of comments. Some of the comments were completely wacky fucking tobacco shit. So, keep it up. Why not? We'll just keep having a great time in the comment section. But do it. Comment. And if you're commenting in good faith and you got some interesting things to say, I absolutely love to read that. So stay warm out there until you're going to start to have to stay cool wearing your respirators and trying to stay away from getting lung disease.